Okay, let me see if I can try this one more time. Doing this recording thing is not my cup of tea, because I feel like I have so much to say, but trying to squeeze it all together into one little few minutes, it's just not quite possible yet. Let me apologize for my background, because I know normally I try to have something a little more interesting in the background, and not this orange wall on the one side, white wall on the other, and then white ceiling overhead. It looks kind of weird, it's all flattened out, but over here you got two walls, ceiling up ahead, and it's it's part of a hotel room. I'm staying in the hotel room tonight, and that's a drawback to hotel rooms is it robs you of the freedom to kind of roam around and explore. When you're at a hotel, you're basically stuck. You can't go very many places in privacy. So, my visit to James Madison's Montpelier. So many things to say about this. First of all, let me just say that my intent when I left North Carolina was to just visit Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. I wanted to see it a second time. I had no other intent besides that. Then Jackie convinced me to visit Williamsburg. I did, loved it. Saw Monticello, loved it. And I thought, and then I went to see James Monroe's Ashlon Highland, loved it. Well, okay. I love the guide, the tour. It was fabulous. And I thought, why don't you go ahead and go see, stick around for a couple days, go see Montpelier. I did, and it was fabulous, And one thing I want to add, because I don't think in any of the videos I shot I have this. James Madison, like George Washington, James Monroe, and Thomas Jefferson, died in debt. He was in debt, and eventually his wife, Dolley Madison, had to sell off Montpelier to pay her debts. I'm not sure who bought it from her. I don't know who bought it from her, but I do know in 1901 the DuPont family purchased it, and they made radical transformations to it. They built onto it, and they covered the original colonial home, which is very interesting, because I got mixed feelings about that. Because I'm like, okay, this is a historic landmark of American history, and you're covering it up. But then on the back side, it was good that they didn't tear it down, because when the last DuPont, I think her name was Marie DuPont, when she passed away in, I want to say 1983, she willed it to the National Trust. I think the National Trust, I think that's what they're called. And they, because she wanted to see it preserved historically. She was aware of the historical importance of this being James Madison's home. They took ownership of it, and then working with the Montpelier Foundation, they found the money and they went about work on restoring it to the natural state of being James Madison's home. Now, what's so fascinating about that is you have a early 20th century home built around the colonial home, and you don't have, Dolley Madison apparently had to sell off all the furniture and all the possessions, and you have to, you're working constantly to find where all these things are and to restore it to their natural home. and meanwhile, taking out, ripping out the 20th century stucco mansion that the DuPont family built around it. It's staggering. To me, it's staggering to think that you can just take it out and the original home is still there. And what I found when I visited was it's like it's still a work in progress. They have the exterior of the home all set, but there's empty spots which you can see are to be filled at a later date. I mean, as they uncover more information and more possessions. And I want to return, 2, 3, 4, years whenever I can, and I'm sure I will see this home grow and closer and closer and closer to become what it was when our fourth president of the United States lived in that residence.
Just a little bit of a view from the standpoint of the visitor center here at James Madison's Montpelier.
One of the things that should be said about when visiting any of these sites is the dependence they have upon people supporting them. This is the visitor center opening, and it was just serene and peaceful as I went up to the house. This is the house, amazing house. It's kind of like, to me, it was like a combination between Mount Vernon and Monticello. I had those two different styles. And this was a view from the steps out onto the gorgeous land that he had. It was just amazing. These frames of buildings out here on the exterior lawn, these are buildings that archaeology has determined were there at the time that James Madison and Dolley Madison occupied this residence. And speaking of them, there they are, James and Dolley. Every presidential retreat has to have a representative of their particular occupant. This room right here on the end, I never understand what exactly the room was used for when James Madison was there, but it was where the conversations with James Madison took place. Just walk up those steps, walk in the door, and there he is. Just amazing. Some of the buildings that these frames represent, there's slave quarters. I believe the last two buildings are the slave quarters, and then there's like a smokehouse and other working structures. Up this pathway, and this pathway is interesting as well. It's not indigenous to the time period, but it's kind of a rubberized mulch. That's what the lady called it. And if you get tired feet, it's very comfortable to walk on. And then it didn't spread out into the grass, but kept the lawn looking as impeccable as it does.
This is so pleasant. I'm walking on the grounds of Montpelier, James Madison's home. Still need some help in trying to know how to pronounce that, but coming up on the garden. So check this out. This is the entrance to the garden here at Montpelier. What a view. Can't get enough of these views. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to find. It says that this is, there we go, 1992, Montpelier, the restored walled garden, a gift from the Garden Club of Virginia. Wow. This is, wow. This is fascinating. Well, a sundial, another sundial. I found one at Williamsburg, and I'm not quite sure how to read the time on it. I think it's somewhere past 11, so maybe this is, no, I don't know. I'm not sure. This is what this end of the garden. Okay, I'm in the garden still, and I'm just curious, what in the world kind of tree is this? I've never seen leaves like that on any tree before. I mean, it is coming off it is coming off the tree. I mean, you see the other trees. What in the world? Someone that knows trees and plants probably knows what these are, but I'm like, I believe, I'm not exactly 100% certain, but I believe that this tree here is the one that the guide was pointing out that the Marquis de Lafayette brought to, the cedar of Lebanon. That's what he said. This is a tree from the Marquis de Lafayette, still here today. Amazing. What a tree. I have to get back a mile just to get this whole thing in one picture.
You know, trying to find some light is just hard sometimes when you're indoors. I wanted to comment, for people who are not aware of the Marquis de Lafayette, he was a major figure in the American Revolution, normally associated with George Washington. I think George Washington one time called him the son he didn't have, or something to that effect. He also knew a number of the founding fathers, James Madison being one of them. As the guide on the tour stated, the Marquis de Lafayette did visit James Madison at Montpelier. And that's another fascinating thing about these presidential homes. You know, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James, now I think about it, I'm not certain on James Monroe, but definitely James Madison, all received a plethora of visitors, just people coming to see them all the time. And the Marquis de Lafayette, a Frenchman who I think he voluntarily served in Washington's army without any pay, and was very instrumental. And in fact, if you ever visit, I think it's the House Chambers. At the in fact, I'm pretty sure it's the House Chambers at the Congress building, Capitol building in D.C. You'll see a life-size, wall-size portrait of George Washington on one side, and then there'll be an unknown figure of the same life-size portrait on the other side, and that is the Marquis de Lafayette. So he had a very important role in our American Revolution.
Well, here I am at Montpelier. This is the iconic symbol that one often sees. There's a name for it, and I forgot. I want to call it the dome, but I don't think that's the right name. But the guide said that's where, right here, this is where James Madison will often come outside and just think, study. And what a view. I mean, look at the view he had to see while he was in there. I mean, on a day like today, just gorgeous. And then the house, just not very far away. I found me a little bit of greenery to put in my background this time. Actually, the sun going down kind of makes it kind of dark in the hotel room, so I decided to take this outdoors. Just to mention to you that the name of that structure that I thought was the dome was actually the temple, James Madison's temple. And it's whenever you see anything with Montpelier, it's often accompanied. The temple often accompanies it. One interesting thing I found as I was wandering around, not very far from the temple, I spied these headstones on the other side of this tree. And I thought, wonder if that might be where James Madison and Dolley Madison are buried. It wasn't. It was something a little different.